First outline, call of Abraham on the table, and then I just want to do this chart. We've kind of looked at it, but I will move closer to the screen so at least they can just kind of get a visual for it, the people who are watching us online. One of the absolute blessings that I had while we were in Australia is that for 12 years I helped. If you know baseball, sorry those of you who don't, this won't make a lot of sense, but if you know baseball, I was the utility infielder for a small preacher training school. So in 12 years I taught at least 80% of the classes one time. So if our teacher who taught Isaiah was gone, then I taught Isaiah and someone else took my class on John or something else. But I asked, may I please have the introduction to the Bible class, because we would have a number of students who maybe had been a Christian for a year. And so you stop and think, you know, you're just a brand new Christian. And over and again, the comment was, I've never read my Old Testament. You know, I'm a New Testament Christian. I've just been in this for a year. And so I would tell them, we're going to go through the Old Testament about 6 different ways. And don't worry, it's not going to be too detailed. But I will give you visual things to help you to see what we're talking about as we go through this. Kurt Castleman preached at Ridgecrest in Midwest City for a number of years. And this was his basic home Bible study. When he just started studying with someone for the very first time, then they just started kind of introducing, and obviously they're going to come to the New Testament, come to Acts, but he would do that by introducing them. And again, and we were blessed to have some of these people with us at Eastside years later, and he just felt like as you kind of start studying the Bible for the first time, then here's kind of a visual picture, and then you can kind of fill things in from there. So Craig, tell me to stop. For those who are online, I'm just getting close enough. And if you'll notice, the V on the front is where we have been, and this is Genesis 1 through 11. And I just refer to this as the universal discussion of what happens before the call of Abraham. So whatever God wanted us to know from let there be light, the start of creation in Genesis 1, through the first 11 chapters is in that V there on the side. And we'll come back and kind of talk through some of that, but I just want you to kind of see this as a visual. Then what we're going to cover tonight is that God appears to Abraham, and we'll talk through what happened and leading into that. And these are approximates, but roughly, and again, thinking of talking with, and like I said, my heart just went out to students who said, I've just been a Christian for a year, I've never read my Bible, and I've only read the New Testament. And I said, don't worry, you won't get lost. We'll just kind of walk through this very simply. But one of the things that we would talk about is that if, and we do this in Sunday morning class, if our podium is the cross, Abraham lives as far before the cross as we live after the cross. And again, thinking of people who've never ever read their Bible, just to kind of have a mental picture. Some will put Abraham maybe into the 1800s. Bill Jones, our teacher at Oklahoma Christian, I was there, had it. And when you have a C, that's the Latin word for circa, about. So we put Abraham about 2000. And so the significance for us is that when we read about, and we'll look at some passages, and this will be, our Lord willing, our next few weeks, then just have this visual picture that, again, if this is the New Testament in Christ, which is just 1 century, then you put Abraham as far before the cross as we are after the cross. Okay? Then the little mountain then is going to be Moses, and Moses is about 1500. And again, some will slide it maybe into the very high 12s. We don't know for sure. But that's an approximate. And then when you come to the next one, that is going to be King David, and he is 1,000. And once we get to David, all the dates are within 1 year, because there's so much archaeology for parallel things and other things that took place and happened, that once we get to David, everything is just really, really pretty tight and really precise. When you have the line that goes up, the first 3 kings are going to be Saul, David, and Solomon. And after Solomon dies, Jeroboam should have been in Jerusalem, but he wasn't. And Jeroboam breaks away in the northern 10 tribes, and that's the top little part there. And they're going to go from 931, and they're carried into Assyrian captivity in 721. So that's your northern 10 tribes, Israel, as they go through. And then Judah is going to continue on. And when you come to that first break where it goes down, there are 3 different times that Jerusalem is captured. The first one is 606, and they don't destroy the city. They come back again in 598 is the second one. And then when they come back the third time, then they're going to capture the city in 586 and destroy and burn the city down. The people are going to be in captivity, and God told Jeremiah that they're going to be there 70 years. And so the prophets in captivity get to thinking and looking at that, and they figure out God's going to bring us back. And we'll just do this real quick. Do you remember the story in the book of Daniel where the handwriting comes up on the wall and it goes, "Meeny, meeny, tekel, parson"? I'm sorry. Even if you're at a drunken feast, if a hand shows up with no body and starts writing on the wall, everybody's gonna pay attention. The people who are, my dad would call them 3 sheets to the wind, are really going to have their attention, because this hand comes up and says, "Meeny, meeny, tekel, parson," and the kingdom falls that night. So that's going to be 539, and then within 3 years, the first captives go back. So notice on that square that goes down, that's Babylonian captivity. If you subtract 536 from 606, guess what you get? 70 years. And that's the time that God's people are in captivity. And it's not on the list, but Ezra and Nehemiah, who both rebuild the walls and come back, they're in the 440s. Some will even say 444. And then Nehemiah, but that takes us through. But for our purposes tonight, all I wanted you to see is that when we start reading about Abraham, and this to me is just such a significant verse, if anyone is Christ's, he is Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And we'll be looking at passages as we kind of work through the life of Abraham, both in the book of Romans, especially chapter 4, Hebrews 11, Galatians 3. And let me just explain it this, and then we'll drop back into our main outline. The primary personality, and I'm with Jesus and the Pharisees, just for this example, but the primary personality for most of the Jews is going to be Moses. And I would say for a good reason. The deliverance of the people from Egyptian captivity, the 10 Commandments, the list goes on and on. Can I use the word paradigm? I'm using the word paradigm to mean the explanation. And the one person that the Jews primarily thought of, and can I also kind of use the word spiritual father. When they thought of our spiritual father, they're going to think of Abraham. But what is going to be significant, especially with Paul is going to go before Moses roughly 500 years, and the spiritual father of Christianity is going to be Abraham. And here's why, and we'll be walking through this over the next couple of nights. Abraham is 75 years old when we come across him tonight, and they have left Ur of the Chaldees. They've gone all the way up to Haran in that upper area, but they've stayed there, and we'll see this for a number of times, number of years. And then again, God calls him to come into the promised land, and a whole series of promises are made to Abraham from the time he is 75 until he's 99. Okay. Sometimes when my wife and I make hospital visits, when they get to talking about all the details of the stitches and stuff, just before I turn green, then she takes over and I just kind of step out of the thing. She was the lab assistant for all the pre-med students at Oklahoma Christian, and we're talking about cadavers, we're talking about joints and all this other stuff. I didn't go anywhere close to it. I didn't want to be carried out. And so this is even hard for me to say. Abraham is going to be circumcised at 99. Okay, I just can't even hardly go there. I mean, knock me out for a week, maybe, but but I'm going back to their period of time, and you just kind of let that sink in. I'm going to use the word pagan as an overstatement. All the stuff by the time he's 75 and he walks by faith and all this stuff that happens before he's circumcised. And the reason that God did this is that Abraham can be the father of both the Jews and the Gentiles because he is declared righteous because of his faith in that 25 years from the time he's called at 75. And then, can I say it this way? Through the circumcision, he becomes also the father of the Jews, but he has been living by faith for 25 years before he's circumcised. So the reason that the Jews loved Moses is that Moses was such an important person for the Jewish faith, but Paul and Christians then are going to go back roughly another 500 years and celebrate the man who lived and walked by faith for the 25 years before he is circumcised. And that way he did that as, can I use our term, Gentile? And he is the father of us all. But those 25 years that we're going to be looking at were so important because he believes God, and God accounts it to him as what? Righteousness. And so he is righteous in the sight of God before he's circumcised. And that's why that becomes such an important character and personality. And so in this discussion, then Abraham becomes that predominant personality for Christians because in that 25 years before he's circumcised, all these things happen that, Lord willing, we'll look at in the weeks to come. So the call to Abraham. Here's our central idea. God's call of Abraham had both a physical and a spiritual commitment. And I'd like for us to describe different dimensions of God's call, God's covenant with Abraham. And I want to use an illustration from Everett Hufford. Everett grew up in Nazareth. And he said, you know, as we go through life, all of us occasionally have, and again, being a teacher, but he just used this to our life. He said, all of us will occasionally have the occasional pop quiz with the occasional major exam. Some of us will have a major exam following a doctor's visit. There may be an accident. You know what? They're just unexpected things will happen. And he said, life is a series of unannounced pop quizzes with the occasional major exam. And what we're going to see is that Abraham is given these various tests by God. And I'll just say this kindly because I'm on his side. As long as he keeps saying, she's my sister, he's not going to pass the exam. But this is what Everett said. God is patient, and oftentimes when we have failed a pop quiz, You just let a little bit of time go by, and He will give us another opportunity to grow into that area. And what I'd like to propose by the time we finish this part of it, and this will take several weeks, we'll have one class just on the conversion of Abraham. Just a class I just love to do. And we'll just go back and look, and he made a good start, and then he just falls flat on his face. And he gets up, and God gives him another chance. He makes a good start. And the thing that's funny to me, you will be a blessing to all nations. Abraham wasn't a blessing to the people who were around him when he's failing these pop quizzes. And we'll see a very much a life situation, and we'll walk through this. So we're going to do something briefly on the first 11 chapters. Let's summarize that, because then that will bring us to the point on our diagram where we start specifically, and God will be working with a man, and then He'll go to a family, and then He'll go to a nation. Okay? By the time our kids were 5 years old, and of course we're doing this at night, and 3 and 4 year olds will stay up for a devotional because they get to stay up. And doing a devotional with small kids just before bedtime is just a great time to do that. And I said, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn the sons of Jacob, because if you know the sons of Jacob, then you know all the tribes of Israel. They go all the way through. And then we're going to know all the kings in the divided kingdom of Judah. And all you have to have, Wayne, is a 3x5 card, and go Reuben, Simeon, Levi. Reuben, Simeon, Levi. And then you just start adding one each night. And in a short period of time, then our kids would know all of the people who are going to be the initial family. So it's a man, okay, a son, and then we're going to start with a small family. I don't call 12 boys a small family, but compared to a nation, a family. And then, of all things, God is going to tell Abraham they will be in a foreign country for 400 years. And let that sink in. Here is Abraham, and childless for 25 years of these promises. And in the process, as God keeps telling him, I'm going to make of you a great nation, God predicts what's going to take place when they go into Egypt. And He tells Abraham about that long before that ever happens. And so we would just work through this. It would go Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And they had a lovely little sister called Dinah. Won't you blow, Dinah, won't you blow, Dinah? Yeah. And by doing that, then anytime our kids came to a Bible class, then they knew something about the structure, something about the thread, something about the story. And hopefully most of you will know this. Craig, when I use the expression, the deer in the headlight look, what am I talking about?
Frozen. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. And sometimes, and I've had this experience too, if you start telling people about Abraham, they've never read the Old Testament, you have to stop and kind of tell the story to help them to see that. And I told our kids, I want you to bring something to every Bible class that you go to. And so for the rest of your life, if you know who the 12 tribes are, you know who the kings are, and then you have a peg for every student, every person in the Bible, then you will bring something to class when you come to class. And because Abraham is so important, then we're going to do the early history, and then we'll move right into Abraham. So, quick review, Genesis 1 through 11. And most of this is going to come from John Willis. He taught Old Testament at Abilene a number of years, and this was really helpful. But notice this. Out of the countless stories that might have been told about primeval early man, the author of Genesis has selected some which teach great religious truth that he wishes to emphasize to his readers. And notice this principle through 4 different accounts. In spite of God's innumerable blessings, man has rebelled against him. And you think we're going to get 4 examples of these before we get to Abraham. Because God loves man, he punishes him to keep him from destroying himself. And out of this punishment, he brings new hope. Possibly the earliest hint of the coming of Jesus is, he will bruise your heel, but what? It will bruise his head. A head bruise is a whole different thing than a heel bruise. And that coming of what ultimately is going to happen with the coming of Jesus is given new hope. So this is often the thread of these stories. But just the example, the fall of Adam and Eve, Cain's murder of Abel, Noah and the flood, and the Tower of Babel. So these are kind of the 4 major events, once we've done the creation, that we have that take us from let there be light to the call of Abraham. And so in that first 11 chapters, this universal history, and there's compressed genealogies. He lived 700 years and then he died. He lived 800 years and he died. And so we get a very compressed view of many things. But Moses chooses 4 events to take us from the Garden of Eden down to the call of Abraham. And that's going to be that part of that early part. So here's number 2. There's a well worked out pattern, and this is the example from Adam and Eve. Man will sin. He strives to evade responsibility for his sin. God pronounces a punitive curse, and God puts man in a situation which he can begin again. And you look at that over and over, oh, am I my brother's keeper? So with each of these 4 stories, you'll see something will happen where men transgress, they sin against God, but God allows them to go on in spite of that. From Genesis 12 on, this number 3, the early stages in a series of events finally bear fruit in the emergence of a chosen people, which are Israel. And this is really significant. The original divine purpose for Israel on earth was to missionization, take the word out, the conversion of all the nations of the world to the one and true living God. And I just gave 2 specific examples, and then there's a whole list of other verses. But notice this, Isaiah 42:6. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you a covenant for the people. And notice, a light to the nations. Israel's original purpose, and with God saying to Abraham, through you I will bless all nations. The blessings of God weren't primarily just to be reserved and contained for one group of people. The one group of people were to be a light to all nations. We see the same thing said in Isaiah 49:6, and you'll see that my servant raised up tribes of Jacob to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. In many ways, Israel failed to do that. And this will finally be fulfilled. Through you, I will bless all nations. And the first time that it kind of has a complete fulfillment of all things is Acts chapter 2. There are gathered in Jerusalem men from all of these various nations under heaven. And the promise in Pentecost on Acts 2 is the fulfillment of what God promised Abraham 2,000 years later. And I would just quickly say this, as the church today, every time we are involved in taking the gospel to every tribe, every tongue, every people, and every nation, we are fulfilling, can I say now, 4,000 years later, the promise that God originally made to Abraham. 75 years old, childless, I'm going to give you a family, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to make of you a great nation. And here we are, 25 years go by, and there's no sons of their own. There's a cluster of these, and I've just chosen these two verses from Galatians. But notice, in Christ, you are all sons of God through faith. And sons is generic, includes obviously sons and daughters. But look at Galatians 3:29, and this is really significant for tonight. If you are Christ, if you are a Christian, then you are Abraham's offspring, and you are an heir according to the promise. Now, I don't think every person, especially smaller children, need to know this before they're baptized. But you just stop and think what that means. If you have been baptized into Christ, raised to walk in newness of life, then if you are Christ's, and we would say formed in the waters of baptism, then you are the personal fulfillment in our generation to what God promised Abraham 4,000 years earlier. We had not a high percentage, but still a large number of people, and still in the church in Australia, that they are the only Christian in their family. And just think, what would it be like if there's no one else in your whole family that's a Christian? And everything from she's lost her mind to he must be brainwashed, all kinds of things have been said, and we have any number of people that they are the only person in their entire family who's a Christian. Well, guess what a Bible class means to someone like that? Guess what fellowship and a meal and all those kinds of things mean? And over, we've had people say to us, because obviously growing up here, we have an extended physical and spiritual family, and we'd have people say, I just can't imagine what it would be like to have grandparents and uncles and cousins who are also Christians, because I am the only Christian in my family. Well, one of the things I would try to explain to them is that I'm so proud of you for being a Christian and hanging in there, but if you remain faithful as a Christian, you are the fulfillment of a promise that God made to Abraham, that through you I'm going to bless all nations. And like, for example, a young man who was German was baptized one night, and one of our Christians said, tonight the nation of Germany has yielded one of its own to the family of God. And you just think, yes, that's right. Through you we will bless all nations. We started church in a town of 3.5 million. Think Newcastle. We were the first little town coming into Sydney. Within 2 years, we have someone from every inhabited continent in this church. And every time we came to church, a part of me would just kind of go, yes, because every tribe, every tongue, every people, and every nation is God's intent, and the church is to fulfill the promises that God made to Abraham in such a broader way than ever Israel did. And that's one of those just marvelous blessings. If you are Christ's, if you're a Christian, then you are Abraham's offspring, and you are heirs according to the promise. And I just think 4,000-year-old promise is being fulfilled. And look at the very bottom. Terah is the father. When he had lived 70 years, he fathered Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And look at the descendants that are there. This is the last part of Genesis 11, and we'll start with 27, and then we'll read down through chapter 12, verse 8. But Genesis 11:27. These are the generations of Terah, and Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran fathered Lot. But Haran died in the presence of his father in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldees. So this is way down at the bottom of the Euphrates River. And Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and Sarah was barren, she had no children. So here's where the journey starts. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan, but when they came to Haran, they settled there. So if you do the Tigris and Euphrates rivers run along, and they virtually halfway there, they moved from kind of the bottom all the way up to the top, probably the top part of Syria. And what we're going to see is that they got halfway to where God had called them, and they may have lived there for decades. So they start the journey, and they make a good start, but for whatever reason, Terah is not willing to go down into the promised land, and I feel like it's probably decades, then they're halfway there. But they settle in this particular place. The days of Terah were 205, and he died in Haran. And this is going to be important for later, and I thought we just put it here. You remember twice Abraham's going to say, she's my sister? Can I say half-truth? Notice chapter 20 and verse 7. Well, she is indeed my sister, and look carefully. She's the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother. So we would call her, can I say, half-sister? And everybody know what I'm trying to say? So when he says, she's my sister, we have the same father, but we have different mothers. So he didn't tell a complete, my dad would call it a whopper, he didn't tell a complete fib. Wayne, are we okay to say, but he told a half-truth, in that he said, well, she's my sister, but technically she's his half-sister. Okay? So this will be an important little bit of information to have for later, because as we go through these, then at least twice, when he's in a tight spot, what is he going to say? You know, she's my sister. And that's going to get him in trouble every time. So here's the call of Abram, and just notice the word your from the word of mouth of God. Go from your country, and where's your country? That's where they have settled for this period of time. Your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. And so they're not tourists. They haven't just been here for a while. They don't talk about the country from which we originally came from. They're talking about where they've been halfway on the way there. To the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. This is the first of the major promises that God makes to Abraham. So, Abram went as the Lord told him. Lot went with him, and notice he is 75 years old when he left for Haran, and he takes his wife, Lot, all their possessions, and they come to the land of Canaan. Verse 6, they come to Shechem, and the Canaanites were in the land, and this is going to be north of Jerusalem, close to where Mount Ebal and Gerizim are. And the Lord appeared and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar to the Lord. And then he's going to move east of Bethel. He's going to move south another 20 miles or so. Pitched his tent. He built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name. And Abraham journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. John Willis breaks these promises down. Request, leave your country, your kindred, your father's house. Promises, a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. He asked Abraham to be a blessing. And like I said, as we're going to see, More often than not, in his lifetime, Abraham is not a blessing to the people that he's around. You ask the king of Egypt when they start having all this stuff attack them because that he's taken Sarah in, and then later again he's going to say, she's my sister. And so the irony is that in time, Abraham will be this spiritual blessing to all these many nations. He is not always that blessing during his physical life. I like to think of three things. Number one, descendants, and it's going to start with Isaac. The land is not going to be, and he tells, walk the length and the breadth of it. That land is not secured until David, and that's going to be 1,000 years later. And then, through you, I will bless all the families of the earth. And like we said, Abraham's approximately 2,000 years earlier, and that promise is not going to start being fulfilled until Pentecost. So here's something I'm really convicted of and committed to. All of us need to pray fervently for things that need to be done, whether it's evangelizing people to come to the Lord. And just because God hasn't answered it while we have breath, when you read Scripture, because He's God, there's times that God has answered people's prayers long after they've been gone. And just because we don't see yes today, don't take that to mean that God won't eventually answer that prayer, and these promises that God promised would happen are going to take a period of time. So we're going to have to skip some things, but let's look at the next page. Abraham learned more about faith from 75 to 100 than he did the first 75 years. God may want to teach you things about faith at this stage of your life in a whole different way than He's taught you up to this point. The biggest tests that Abraham has don't come until after he's 75. And she's my sister. He'll go forward. He'll take a step back. Faith is more a process than an event. But look down, and this is Joshua 24 and verse 2, and this is number 2 in the thing. They served other gods. Abraham and his family were idolaters in Ur of the Chaldees. And I think the process of moving them away from the original family to Haran, and then moving him to the promised land. Can I use the term, he weaned him away from some of those early family traditions of polytheism, worshiping many gods? And so these people are going to be idolaters within their heritage and their family roots. And little by little, God's going to work with Abraham to bring him out of that. So faith is the journey. And notice, go to the land from your kindred. Well, in Genesis 11:31, they settled there. This became home. And if you look down under 1:3:3, Terah took Abraham's son. They came to the land of Canaan, but they settled in Haran. And then look at this very bottom, 1:4. Look at the number of times he lived in Haran. Go out from the land. God moved them from there. And what I want you to see is that we're not told how long. Some people wonder if they were 25 or 30 years in Haran before, like if Abraham was 40 years old before he's 75 and God calls him again. They lived long enough there that that's now home. And anybody who's moved, how long do you have to live at some place before that becomes home? It wasn't just a very short period of time. And they get halfway there, and then they set down roots, and then God calls him the second time to come into the promised land. Last page. And notice this, when it's time to find a wife for Isaac, look down in verse 4, go to my country, go to my kindred. What do those words tell you? Haran is now home. He has lived there long enough. He's not thinking of Ur of the Chaldees anymore. And this makes my head hurt. David Roper's dad, and I don't have the exact figures, if he lived to be 91, he moved I just, growing up on a farm, I just can't imagine moving 95 times in my life. Where's home? Well, they live in Haran long enough that when it's time to get a wife, go home, and it's not Ur of the Chaldees, you go back to where we were, and that's where you to get the girl. Notice Genesis 24:39, from my clan, my father's house. So you look at 3. One aspect of faith is learning to walk by faith and not by sight. Hebrews 11:8, by faith Abraham obeyed God. He went out not knowing where he was going. Okay, we're all different. I am actually paranoid. If I don't know exactly where I'm going, I pull off the road and I stop. Even before we had telephones, I'd go to a station, and I'm with people, well, if we keep driving, we'll find it. I go, no, stop. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to know, if I don't know where I'm going, I'm going to sit tight until I find out exactly where to go. This would just drive me nuts. Just follow me, and we'll go to the land that I'll show you. Well, where is it? Well, just follow me, and we'll find out. Well, this is a part of the developing of faith. We're moving away from our family, our roots, our heritage, and just pack up the tent. And ladies, Ur the Chaldees and Haran are very, very civilized places. Can you imagine wall-to-wall tent for the rest of your life? The nice thing about camping is getting to go home. And when we start talking about people of faith, ladies, you just imagine living in a tent for all those years, having a baby and all this other stuff, and you never go back to houses, streets, and civilization as you do this. So this will be real quick. Number 4, look at this calling on the name of the Lord. It started with Seth. People began to call on the name of the Lord. But I'm just doing this with my fingers. Notice the blend between altars and calling on the name of the Lord. What they're going to do is that Noah built an altar. Genesis 12 and verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abraham. I'll give you this land. So he built an altar. They went to the hill country. They make a move. They east of Bethel. They pitched their tent. He built an altar. He called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis 13:4, he made an altar. He called upon the name of the Lord. They move again. Genesis 13:18, they come to Hebron. He built an altar. And then we're going to see when God asked him to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice, he built an altar. You can actually follow Abraham's journey through the promised land, because wherever he stopped, he built his own altar. It wasn't one of the heathen, one of the idolatry places of worship. And every time Abraham was going to be in any place for any period of time, the first thing he did was to build an altar. And then there's that wonderful expression. And guess what we hear in the book of Acts chapter 2? Whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord will what? Be saved. And that command in Acts 2 starts with Seth. And then here Abraham, the man of faith, over and over and again. Every time he stops, we're going to build another altar, and there we're going to call on the name of the Lord. Children's song, what is true of Abraham's faith is true of us. And I just want you to think, God may be calling you to new levels of faith this year because of your age that you've never reached before. He's still working on me to make me what I ought to be. Took him just a week to make the moon and the stars, the sun and the earth and Jupiter and Mars. How wonderful and marvelous is he. He's still working on me. And as the sons and daughters of Abraham, this week may we walk by faith and not by sight. God bless.